It's kind of funny. Last weekend we celebrated Pentecost, right? The sending of the Holy Spirit. And as part of the homily, I reviewed the fruits of the Holy Spirit, suggesting that if we've been given the Spirit, then those fruits should be evident in our lives. If they're not evident, well, then the question would be, well, what's obstructing the Spirit from producing good fruit in our life? I paused on some of the fruits a little bit longer than the others, one of which was faith, fidelity. And I suggested, are we being faithful to our prayer commitments? Are we being faithful just to being present at Mass for the entirety of the Mass, or are we leaving early? If we are, then I suggest, well, there's something obstructing the Spirit from producing that fruit. Normally, at the 7:30 and 9 o'clock Mass, leaving early isn't much of an issue. 11 o'clock, a little bit more. 4 p.m., a little bit more. But I figured those are the two Masses where we have the most visitors. So it only makes sense because surely John Paul II parishioners would never leave Mass early, right? Surely. It was funny because at 4 p.m. Mass, our other deacon and I, we have a different vantage point than what you do. We see you, and we see when you leave early. And it was so funny. Last weekend, I talked about that. Deacon Ketty and I walk out, and we see some cars already pulling out onto the street. And he says, well, that was brazen. To which I replied, it's good for the preacher. It's helpful to know how ineffective his words are. So when a compliment comes along, it's especially appreciated. And there was such a comment on Friday when I met with an older couple preparing to get married. And if you probe a little bit more deeply into her comment, it was not so much something that I had said, but something that the Spirit was working in her heart. I'd met with them weeks and weeks ago, and I'd asked, what drew you to one another? What was it that you said, he is the person for me? She is the person for me. And she told me on Friday she didn't know how to answer that really until she heard me say last weekend that the invisible became visible. And she said, I had hoped for over 20 years to find someone to spend the rest of my life with. And I thought that would never materialize until that hope, that invisible hope, became visible in him. And I said, that's the one. He's the one. That innate desire and need for companionship is, for me, one of the clearest indicators of being created in the image of a God who is a relationship of persons, Father, Son, and Spirit. Now you might say, well, animals like to be together too, and I would say, yes, it's true, but that need is fulfilled by physical proximity, which is not enough for humans, as we all know quite well. For we can be physically close to someone, but spiritually, emotionally, far, far, far apart. We're not made only for physical closeness, but relationship, spiritual and physical, true human closeness. But there are those who have that hope and it goes unfulfilled for the whole lifetime. Or there are others who have that hope and it materializes, and then it tragically is broken with divorce or death. And it's from that vantage point that we might understand something of the nature of the Catholic priesthood. It's the visible presence the priesthood is of Jesus, the bridegroom of our souls, the companion for our journey through life and through the dark valley of the shadow of death. The priest says in his visible presence, you are not alone. God has not abandoned you. He is Emmanuel. He is with you. He walks with you. So in this celebration of the Holy Trinity, it's as though we're invited to contemplate or to ask, does it matter who God is, really? Does it matter to you? Does it matter what we believe? Does it matter if the Jewish God is understood as a solitary being, as a being whose inner life is not characterized by communion, relationship, and sharing, but by supreme self-sufficiency, separation, and law? Does it matter if the Muslim God's authority rests in his will and not his reason, so that he, God, could legitimately command an evil such as murder and call it a good, requiring only submission from his subjects as a sign of their belief and fidelity? Does it matter if the Hindu gods envelop all of creation like an impersonal force which can be changed and corrupted by the likes of a Darth Vader? Does it matter if the point of Buddhism and your yoga is the annihilation of your personality and the destruction of yourself, so nirvana may be obtained while your consciousness of all things, including who you are, is lost? Does it matter if you declare no belief whatsoever as you assume the status of a God and define when human life begins and ends and what the gender mistakes of nature are? Does it matter if God is a relationship of persons, Father, Son, and Spirit, a relationship of love, for God is love? Does it matter that the commandments and counsels he spoke are founded on truth and reason? Does it matter that he called us friends, not slaves? Does it matter that God made himself poor, entered into our world, embraced our alienation and sufferings, and is truly Emmanuel, God with us? Does it matter that he required forgiveness in order to be forgiven? Communion in order to be fully alive? And self-forgetful love in order to be saved? I mean, what do you think? Does it matter to you? Does it matter who God is? And does it matter what you believe? I suspect, among other things, that our lonely hearts say, it does.